For today's panel, we are shaped by the generations before us, their resilience, sacrifices, and unspoken struggles. But healing is not just about looking back, it's about reclaiming our stories and choosing how we move forward. This panel brings together experts in mental health, counseling, and storytelling to explore the power of intergenerational healing. Through personal experiences and professional insights, they will discuss how to break cycles, nurture self-compassion, and embrace the strength of our roots while forging our own path. Because true main character energy means honoring the past while stepping into the future with clarity, confidence, and purpose. Let's give a round of applause for stepping up. So I would like to introduce our esteemed moderator today. Dr. Helen Su is a clinical psychologist and Stanford lecturer specializing in Asian American mental health, grief, and culturally responsive care, with leadership roles in psychological organizations and advocacy for marginalized communities. Please give her a round of applause.
Thank you for pulling up to intergenerational trauma. I think this whole event is main character energy that I think we are the ones we've been waiting for. What if we all have roles in healing our trauma and healing our generations? This is such an exciting panel. I want us to get in there and get started. There is so much wisdom. You'll read their official bios, but also so much compassion and lived experience in this space. So let's get started meeting our panel. I want to start with Kyung-Mi Choi, who is a professor in the Department of Counselor Education at San Jose State University, a researcher, advocate, and editorial leader on boards and counseling journals, and the author of The Child Behind the Bushes, A Daughter's Healing Journey of Intergenerational Trauma. Come on up. And I will briefly ask each person to give their unofficial bio as well, because that's important, who we really are, besides the titles. My name is Helen Su and Xu Hua. I was born in Taiwan. My family is Chinese, Taiwanese, Mongolian, Thai, Vietnamese, Filipino, American, and I'm a connector, an instigator, and an educator. And Kyung-Mi, your unofficial.
Hi everyone. Hi, my name is Kyung-Mi. I was born and grew up in South Korea. I came to the US early 20s. So when I work with the immigrants or communities, Asian community, I can relate to first generation as well as second or third. So my stories relate to those journey across generation. And I want to share more.
Great. Thank you. Our next panelist, Soo-Jin Lee, is a licensed marriage and family therapist, executive director of Yellow Chair Collective. Follow them on Instagram if you haven't already. And the co-author of Where I Belong, Healing Trauma and Embracing Asian American Identity. Your unofficial?
Oh, unofficial. This feels like a pageant. We were just saying that. But my name is Soo-Jin Lee. I am a Korean American. I would identify myself as a 1.5 generation Korean American, which means that I came here when I was young years old. There you go. So I do have some dabble of experiences of having in between spaces and identity and the struggles of what that means. And I love helping people support in that journey and find a sense of belonging. Thank you.
Awesome. Our next panelist is Ulash Thakor Dunlap, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a doctorate in educational leadership, assistant professor in counseling at Cal State East Bay, author and mentor with consulting and leadership roles locally to internationally. Ulash. And used to be at Rams. Hey, Rams San Francisco.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Yeah. Hi all, my name is Ulash Fakor Dunlap. I was born and raised in London, England, Asian Indian. My mum was born in Burundi, in Africa. My dad was born in Uganda. They moved from the Idi Amin regime in Uganda to London. I'm a mom, I'm a friend, I'm an auntie, and I love my dog, Iggy.
Woo! We can relate. Absolutely, last but not least, Ellie Yang Camp is an artist, an Asian American community educator, and is the author of Louder Than the Lies, Asian American Identity, Solidarity, and Self-Love, published just in 2024. Ellie.
Is this on? There it is on. Hi. Unofficial bio. Hi, I'm Ellie. I am from San Jose. I am the daughter of Taiwanese immigrants. I am totally a Bay Area girl. I grew up in San Jose. I went to Berkeley. I went to Stanford. I'm back in the South Bay. I'm so happy to be here in San Francisco with you today. Other than my official bio, I would also say I am a stay-at-home parent. And I spend most of my day in existential crisis, and a lot of that is thinking about what the hell is going on with Asian America right now. So thank you for having me here.
So you can tell there is so much education, but also real talk in this room as folks who walk with people in all kinds of intergenerational trauma and self-definition. Because we're not here to just talk about trauma. We're here to talk about healing, about recovering, and reappropriating. So I'm so happy to be with this panel. Maybe just starting as simply as possible, maybe start with Sujin. How do you succinctly explain or define what is intergenerational trauma?
Ooh, okay, let's get started. When I try to understand different concepts, I understand them through stories. And so I thought I would define them through a story that is related to my life. So my grandmother, she grew up in poverty. And in order for her to survive, she had to clean and cook for her aunt and uncle. If the house wasn't clean enough, then she was abused. She had her daughter, who is my mother, and she instilled in her the importance of keeping things tidy and clean. And she internalized, so my mom had internalized this idea of what a woman should be and how she should behave and how the house reflects the identity of her being. She had me, and she instilled in me that value as well. There's a lot of things that I love about the things that my mom had taught me, but when I got married and the dishes were left overnight, then I would start to feel guilty that I was not a good enough wife. And that message was an internalized message that I had received from my mom, that she had received from her mom, and all the women down the generations. And so this fragmented identity and pieces and values that we have put together out of fear, out of trauma, out of survival, and that gets passed down through generations, that's how I want to define intergenerational trauma.
Fantastic. And yes, a narrative is the way to go. Ellie, could you also talk about your view?
Yeah, I love that definition, Sujin. I think I also think about it in the way that sometimes with our families, there are things that happen because of forces that are out of our control. Colonization, these bigger systems of oppression, and that we experience these traumas, and sometimes they are so big that they require more than one generation to heal from it. And so it impacts the way we relate to each other sometimes, and we don't even realize that that's what's going on, but that we are also dealing with these larger systems, and it's impacting the way that we relate to each other.
Thank you. Now, to get to what we really want to talk about too is, can we describe what intergenerational healing is, right? Because we are the main character here. And if you were like me, sort of a middle-aged crowd, all the Asian American stories when I was growing up, we were sort of the side character, or maybe a tragic character, or maybe window dressing there just to be attractive. But we're taking over our own narratives. And so, really, in doing that, we are causing healing. But, like, there are so many forms. What is intergenerational healing? As you would describe it. And I'll start with Kyung-mi.
Sure. In order to answer the question, intergenerational healing, I'm going to add a little bit about trauma. Especially you mentioned about stories and memories. When those stories are lost, when those stories are not being shared by your families, where can you find that healing? I think my journey starts from there. For me, simple way is looking into a mirror. Mirror is broken. And I try to reflect myself, try to understand me as a child, as an adolescent, as an adult, try to make sense about my self-identity. However, those cracks and lines and missing pieces, I couldn't really understand myself. And those stories were not being shared with me through generations. So my healing actually starts with learning about these stories, but not start from me. Actually, as my book mentioned, my mom entered my life and started sharing stories about my mom, my grandmother, my great-grandmothers, especially her stories, carrying so much pain and sorrows and loss, yet I found compassion. I found love. I found me in those stories. So that was intergenerational healing for me. Yeah.
It's so beautiful. Every person is like, yeah. And Ellie, I think you wanted to talk about this too.
Yeah, I often think about it from like within the family. So I always think, there are these larger systems that are at work that are part of our family's histories. And those systems want to tear our families apart because if they can do that, they can take advantage of us. And so sometimes I think intergenerational healing is really just about like, how do we live together? Like, how do we live with each other and not give up on each other? Because I think like oppression so much, it wants us to give up on each other and say like, oh, I don't need them anymore. Like, I'm going to just do whatever this oppressive system wants me to be and mold myself into like a model minority or whatever. And what does it mean to really like fight for our families and fight for our communities and stay together?
Mm-hmm. Think about that hashtag, not your model minority. We talk about work through generations that were not defined by the traumas, although learning the stories, it's absolutely important to even understand these murky feelings, habits that we have, secrets that have been actively quieted. I want us to talk a bit about, so how is it that what we do now can actually reverberate through generations, definitely for the future, even a little bit healing the past. And Ulash, I think you see a lot of this as a therapist and in all your roles.
Yeah, can you hear me? Oh. What a great question. I always think about, we all experience stress, right? We all have different ways of coping with our lives. And then we add on stressful life events. So when I think about it, some of it is learned. When I think about what I've learned in terms of how I cope, how I behave, what I do. And so, for example, I don't know if this resonates with some of the audience members here as a caregiver. As a mom to a teenager, it's really stressful. I work, he doesn't like me most of the time. And that stress really, and I'm anxious. Am I doing a good enough job? Am I a good enough mom? I think my panelists said earlier, those are learned behaviors from my mum. My mum didn't really say it consciously, always unconsciously, that I wasn't good enough. So when I think about your question about can we change that, I can change that. We can change that through support and help. So, for example, I join moms groups so that I can feel supported. I go to therapy. I speak to my neighbor. I use techniques to help me calm down when I'm taking my dog for a walk. Why? Because then I can be present for my son, which a lot of time I'm not because I'm in my head. So when I think about changing that next generation, he's now seen me like, oh, mom is working on her stuff. And I'm modeling for him because he's going to be an adult. Maybe he'll date, maybe he won't date, he'll be a leader, but then he can pass that on to the next generation. So that's what I think about when you ask that question, Helen.
Thank you. I'm putting that family piece to it. You know, as someone who used to do a lot of family therapy, I find that there's so much pressure on parents to get things right, or as a partner to say things right. But remember that it's not about being right or perfect, that sometimes putting aside our egos and our fears and our defenses is actually the key and the door to begin a different kind of healing, right? But I also like that not pathologizing our communities for reacting the way they do, because that's what they needed to survive at the time. But now we're trying to figure out, how do we live in this time and prepare going forward? You know, and the next thought I want to talk about was, how do your understanding and practices for healing intergenerational traumas and hurts, have they maybe changed at different stages in your life? And Sujin, can you start us out?
I feel like I haven't gone through a long stages of life yet. However, I do see kind of a journey of healing that I'm putting pieces together, and if I can verbalize that piece. First, I was in grad school, and the grad school going to therapy helped me to verbalize my inner thoughts and my understanding of my emotions and what was happening around me better. So that vocabulary, I think, was kind of the first stage of healing journey for me. And then once I started experiencing this vocabulary about what I was experiencing and how all of these different contexts and intergenerational trauma was trickling down into my life, and then I was having a lot of sense of grief and anger as well. So that was the next stage of healing, was allowing that grief to take place, allowing all the questions of what ifs to take place too. What if we never came to this country? Those were thoughts and ideas that were never allowed to me in my life, because how dare I? I have seen my parents make the sacrifice to be here, to give me the education, give me everything that I have, right? So how dare I grieve about such things? How dare I blame them for such things? But the next stage was really allowing myself to fully embrace that this is part of a grieving and anger journey alongside all the beautiful things and all the sacrifices that they've made for me as well. After that was coming to terms with building context around my parents' stories, my grandmother's stories, because I was in my head about all the internal languages that I was picking up, right? So instead of fighting with myself and my grief journey, I started to connect with my family about the things that I was experiencing. And depending on who the family member was, of course, there was some emotional capacity for difficult conversations, and others, there was a little bit less. But I started building more context and outside of trauma, what their identities look like as well. I have never known my father outside of the being and the way that he had treated me. But once I began asking him questions about his life, his upbringing, and his parents, I had a fuller context as to who it was outside of being my dad, Sujin's dad, right? And that brought so much compassion, the compassion that you were experiencing and talking about for me as well. Now, the last stage that I am really immersed into alongside, and this isn't just like continual stages that you move on and graduate from one place to the next, right? This is still happening all internally for me as well. But the last thing that got added to this healing journey for me is the community element. For me to finally be able to, now that I've found this voice and language, I've learned it and I'm building context, to be able to share it with you all. And for me to listen to other people in the community, and my sense of belonging and your sense of belonging can now exchange each other in this community. And so this is the part that I'm practicing now.
Thank you. So thoughtful. And Ellie?
Oh wow. So how our healing journey has changed as we've gotten older. So I definitely feel like I'm gonna speak specifically as a child of immigrants in relation to my immigrant parents and kind of dealing with all the effects of just migration. Because I think even just the migration story, whether if it was a positive experience or whether it was because of war, refugee experience, something like that, I think no matter what, it is traumatizing because you are uprooting yourself, right? And so I think even just recognizing that is really important. But I think, when I was younger, teen, 20s, I think it was really easy for me to, blame my parents for everything, right? It's like, they weren't perfect in this way, all that, like if only they had done this or done this, things would have been better. Or even right now, like feeling like I wanted like an apology about certain things or they owe me something and kind of being kind of stuck in that. And I think at the same time, my mind was getting really messed up because I love watching TV. And so like I absorbed through my entire childhood all these images of American sitcom families and what it meant to be like a good family or a happy family, which also it's TV, so it's fake, right? But like it's like when else am I seeing a family talk to each other if it's not on TV? I'm not like in my friends' homes at dinner time hearing their families and seeing what it's like in their homes. I'm only seeing my family and what I see on a screen. And so I think it took me some time to kind of grapple with that about like what are the expectations that I'm putting on my parents that are unfair and absolutely not culturally relevant. And then especially now as a parent, like I also have teenagers. And so like going through the parenting experience yourself is extremely humbling. And like I can remember, right? I can remember when I was 15, what was my mom doing? I have a 15-year-old now. What am I doing? Right? And like what and from my perception as a 15-year-old at my parents, the things that I assumed that they were thinking about, and then now knowing, oh, there's like so much more that they were worried about. They were juggling so much and they were literally doing the best that they could do. And so I think even just being able to, as I get older, it's that whole thing where you can kind of see your parents as human beings and have more grace on that and to reflect on that and be like, okay, I can kind of like let go of some of that, the stuff that I think I was hanging on to, or at the very least not hold it against them. Because it's like, obviously things weren't perfect. Obviously I'm not a perfect mother. We're making mistakes with our teens all the time. But it's like, it's like you just, like you want to stay together, right? And so I think so much of that is like, as you get older, it's just, and learning their stories and things like that is just, how do you humanize them more and not see them as like the source of villainy? Because I think it's very easy to just blame your parents for everything, right? And then having to like mature out of that.
Thank you, Ellie. And Kyung-mi?
It's amazing. I hear my own story in your stories there. Going back to my life, I remember when I was 15, 16, I was asking this question, what's love? So philosophical question, yet it was very practical. People around me, I cannot see love in them, even though my parents, my mom, my grandmother, my father, and I seeing them, my mother was just so stoic. She didn't express any emotions. Even I asked her, what's your name? My grandmother said, that's not important. You don't need to know. And I see my mom was always angry. I thought it was me. So I couldn't understand spiritual way that God exists and where, right? So that was my journey. And throughout, giving up, I actually almost gave up my own connection with the family. I came to US to learn about myself, to be independent, to accept my relationship, sexual orientation, all those things. But I realized that the things that I tried to avoid and running away, actually I found a beautiful treasure and healing source, which is through my mom, sharing their stories. And through their stories, I was able to see my mom, humanizing my mom as a person who had dreams, who had difficulties in their lives. She was sharing about, she was a survivor of sexual assault and telling me about my grandmother also experienced similar things. They had to quiet to support and protect the families. I didn't know any of that. So hearing their stories and reflect back, my own symptoms, my own experience with them totally shifted. And one thing I want to share is that there's something beyond what we can understand in terms of healing. For me, my family definitely traumatized by spiritual, religious organizations and experiences, yet I also experienced healing through spiritual experience. So I want to mention that because in research, academia, we don't talk about that part.
Thank you. Woo. Let's breathe on that for a minute, y'all. Right, that we could sit here and cite a bunch of articles about what's the research on trauma healing, what are the protocols for healing. But of course, almost none of those evidence-based protocols are based on us and don't have our stories. And I so appreciate having acknowledgement about grief and rage and change, what it is to grow in our understanding, to not be afraid of saying, I was wrong or I didn't see everything and we can do better, right? That, we are doing the best we can, and adaptability is actually honestly the most foundational skill. Survival of the fittest doesn't mean the strongest, the most stoic, the most closed. It means the most adaptable and the most connected. So community too, as being like the most important stage ultimately of healing. And even as a therapist, it's not a two-person, our earlier panel with Angela. Healing isn't Western therapy, two people in a room. Amazing things can happen there, beautiful things. But ultimately, even as a therapist, we want you to go out there and be with your family and your community or your chosen family. And that's where we really heal the whole generations. So this idea of community care and connections, right? I know this is an area all of you had experience in. And sometimes people say, I don't really know what that looks like per se, or maybe I'm already doing it. Could you give maybe some specific examples that you've witnessed or engaged in? I'll start with Ulash.
Yeah, Helen, this is healing. As you're all speaking and I'm looking at each one of you, this is community. So when I think about traditional models like therapy and it costs money, this is healing. So I just want to name that. I'm very non-traditional in my approach, although I think in the box and outside the box. And I was thinking about it on my drive. I was thinking gardening is so healing. I don't know if some of you have been to Florence Community Farm in Bayview Hunters Point. When I think about generation and healing, I went with my son a couple of years ago. All different generations are there. We're helping each other. We are getting dirty. We are nurturing each other. So gardening and being out is really therapeutic and healing. And the second thing I think about is mentorship, because it takes a village, I believe, to raise one person. So Helen and I, just as an example, we've done a lot of mentoring. We were on the American Psychological Association Minority Fellowship Program, where we mentor the next generation of psychology students, mainly students of color. Maybe they haven't experienced trauma or traumatic stresses, but they are working with communities that are experiencing trauma. So to me, that's community healing and supporting at its finest our next generation. Cross-generational, they're much younger than I am, but I'm learning so much from them. So those are two things I think about when you ask that question, Helen.
Thank you. Love that. And Sujin.
I was thinking about when you were posing this question. I am from the LA area, and in the San Gabriel Valley part of the LA area, there are a lot of Chinese grandmas and grandparents that are doing Tai Chi at the park. Every Saturday, Sunday at the park, they get together and do Tai Chi. And to me, just watching them do that is such a mindfulness healing thing, to just even watch them, to not even participate in it. And then one day my business partner and I, we were saying, what if we participate in it, right? So we created this wellness retreat where we wanted it to be intergenerational. And we brought the Tai Chi instructor to this young generation of wellness seekers to do Tai Chi together and learn. And to us, that was the beginning of bridging the gap of all of these different traditional methods that already exist as healing models. We just have to rediscover them into and reintegrate them into our lives again in the way that they make sense for this generation. And so speaking of that, one of my favorite things that creates community healing is food. And I feel like it's the one common denominator that really brings all the generations together. And it brings that sense of identity, that belonging, and how all the mixes of the confusions that we have about ourselves, our sexuality, our womanhood, whatever it is, right? We mix that together into food recipes and we share that with each other. And we don't have to talk about and dissect and psychoanalyze what this means. We just have to sit down and eat together, talk about our lives. And that on its own is intergenerational healing. And so one of our favorite things to do is just exchange recipes, exchange all the different meal preps that we do with my friends, and go to my mom and dig into her fridge. That's healing for me.
Thank you. Yeah. You know, sometimes people will ask, like, how do these really touching, loving, connecting moments, but like, how does that cause healing? And, you know, if we get to the nerding out part, right, really so much about healing from trauma is letting your body, mind, spirit know you're safe here, even for moments. Because what causes trauma and causes that damage and that epigenetic damage that hurts through generations is that terror, that survival. But we're creating spaces, a meal, an event, a talk where you can be completely, totally you and all the people that have helped bring you to this moment, you know. And I want to make sure in our time together, I had asked everyone to think about because I want this to be applied. This isn't theoretical. We live this. So I'd asked everyone to think about if you had like a takeaway to do or a prompt to think about for folks about the topic of intergenerational trauma and healing, what would you want to share? And you could also share a resource or a book or something about that too for folks. And so I want to ask everybody to, suggest something.
About body, mind, the heart connection is so strong and so important in healing process, and that's what research is showing about. And I think you as an individual growing up as a child and adults, you remember what happened to your body actually as a child. It doesn't need to be a trauma. What I'm saying is some of the strange experience with my body. Some of the examples I had, I was pulling my hair out of control. I didn't know why I was doing. I had night terror. I didn't know why I couldn't sleep. I have extreme fear in my body. And those are phases, and I didn't find the solutions or just experience that. But when I was experiencing healing, I just realized that all those memories from my own generation, but my parents, my grandparents, is in here. So many of you know the Body Keeps Score, the Vander Kolk's book, talking about trauma is not in the past. It lives in our body in the present moment. You relive again and again. And I had the experience when I was going through a healing process, listening those stories, and those pieces click, click, click. Oh my gosh, that's the reason my body tried to heal naturally but I didn't know, I didn't have the guidance or mentor resources to understand my body. And one thing I do is really take care of your body. And it's not just a self-care per se. It's just, I know that my body is a temple of something bigger than what I'm aware. Temple of healing, temple of something bigger. I guess love, that's what I want to say, love. One thing, when I mentioned about the broken mirror, I just one thing realized that the mirror is not created by me. It was passed down through generation. So I tried to understand the cracks and myself, I couldn't understand. But I realized that it's not so much about understanding those cracks, those missing pieces, but understanding who held that mirror before me and looking at them, not through my eye, what I could see with the senses, but it's more heart. I was able to see those people and compassionate to hold them in my heart. And there was a healing. And the book helped me was The Little Prince. That was such a spiritual book for me, actually. Yeah.
Thank you.
I love children books. There's so much depth to them. But if I may, I wanted to give you all an exercise, actually, that we can all do right now in this moment to have that piece of healing taken with us together in this community. Because sometimes when we talk about it on stage, healing feels like something that is this huge destination we have to get to. But it really doesn't look like that. It can happen right now, right here, in this 1 minute exercise. And so if you want to, go ahead and just take a deep breath with me. In and out, and you can get comfortable if you want. And I want you to think about and imagine the most comforting thing that you had this week. I'm imagining my dog sitting on my lap. It might be a meal that you had that was comforting for you. It might have been just that deep sleep that you had and you woke up so fresh. Maybe it was sharing a cup of tea with a friend, having a good conversation or a good laughter with a friend. Or it could be just something as simple as you were just getting ready in the morning, putting your lipstick on or eyeliner on or whatever, and you're thinking, wow, that looks great today. Whatever it is, just think of that one moment for just the next 15 seconds. And now I want you to notice how you're feeling in your body. Just how much more calmer, how much more relaxed, how much safer you feel just by remembering that one simple moment in your day. Take a deep breath in and just absorb all that comfort in you and breathe out. Then if you have your eyes closed, then feel free to open your eyes and just come back to this room. That's it. This is healing. We just are healed together right now in this 1 minute. This is the exercise for me. It's just remembering the good things in my life, just the small things in my life.
Thank you, Ulash.
Thank you for that. I feel so calm. I've forgotten what I wanted to say. Thank you. Appreciate that. My takeaway is always, how can we stay in community given what's going on in our country and in our world, my experiences of colonization and my own immigration path, and I think about, how can I stay in community when we are so divided? So I think about, what are those couple of people that I'm going to reach out to, that maybe you're going to reach out to, so that we can still stay connected as needed?
I think my takeaway, so I am a former high school history teacher. I'm the only one up here that is not a mental health professional. So my history takeaway is to get to know your histories. And by that, I mean not only your own family history, but also the histories of the United States and Asian American history, because It's one thing to deal with our family traumas, right? The multi-generational family traumas. But living in the United States, we are still continually being attacked by these other oppressive systems. And so for us to understand what we're grappling with in terms of those systems is also extremely important. And so just taking the time to, get to know your family history a little bit better, hearing the stories of your ancestors, but also our ancestors as Asian Americans that have lived on this land in previous generations from us, like what were their stories and how did they deal with living as an American, as an Asian American here? Like, I feel like bringing those things together is really important in terms of our holistic health. Because I think a lot of times when we talk about Asian American things, we quickly think about our families, obviously. But there is this whole other identity, this racial identity, that is harder for people to talk about, but just as important in terms of how we're living our everyday and how we are bringing our communities together and how we're trying to move forward.
Thank you. Whew. And a resource or a book or further reading, everybody here is an author. So highly recommend. And I think everybody is also on socials because this is a dialogue, and I love that. Like, again, with the theme, taking up space. Think about what you were never taught. What I realized at a certain point was that every single thing that I learned that contributed to my getting into national leadership positions, I learned it from Asian American studies. I did not learn it from my doctorate. In fact, I was explicitly not taught about systemic oppression or policy or power in my doctorate. So there are reasons you're taught what you're taught, and there are stories that you need to look up, and there are stories you need to write. Very, very much. And I look forward to reading all of those. So that's a resource. I think if I want to leave one thought, there's a word called survivance that largely comes from our Native American friend scholars. I love survivance because it is more than just resilience. It is more than just grit. It is about creative, active refuting that we are not victims, that we have intergenerational strength and wisdom and legacy, and to focus on that, because there's a lot, and in the mental health field, that focuses on, trauma and victims. It's like we are so much more than that, y'all. So that's kind of a term I'd love for y'all to look up. And also, there's an amazing session, I think already started, about reclaiming your narrative here, so telling your stories. And look up my friend Dr. Nellie Tran. She's on TikTok, Instagram, and all that. But she has a journal article about infiltrator phenomenon. So I want you to think about that. Not imposter phenomenon, because none of us are imposters. But you will feel bad sometimes and get negative experiences because you're infiltrating a system that was not made for you. So, infiltrators. So that's the kind of the feel we hope you take from here, that it is hard work. We're not going to pretend it's not. It's often painful work and often it's super uncomfortable, even from the people we care about. But also, as parents know, sometimes when you're trying to do the right thing, the person you love is also pissed at you while you're doing it, but in the greater good. And I think we have a bit of time even for some audience Q&A. I don't know how we're going to organize this. For volunteers, do we have mics, or how do we want to?
Okay. Great. So if you raise your hand, and I just wanted to mention that every question will get a Doke B sticker and keychain. She is a mother of two beautiful children, so going with the panel. So I see a first hand in the back.
Hi, everyone. To everyone on the panel, thank you so much for all of your words. My name is Asta, and I'm a psychology doctoral student, and I have a lot of trauma of my own, and I work with children and families who, many of whom are Asian American, and are also working through their trauma. And I wonder if you have any words of advice or resources for other Asian American mental health professionals, and just if you have advice about navigating our own trauma and healing our own trauma, and like doing self-care as we work for our clients. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a work in progress for some of us in this field, I believe. I'll own it, I hope you fill your own cup as a provider, as a trainee, because if we are running on an empty gas tank, we are no good to anyone else. So I hope you get the support you need, whether it's support from your peers, from your community, if you're spiritual, join a group, mentorship. Mentorship, there's a lot of research out there. It can change our trajectory. I know it's changed mine, so I'll leave it at that.
One thing I share with my graduate students in counselor education, I really encourage them to say thank to your own emotions, especially those challenging emotions. When we want so bad, such as intimacy, connection, love, community, those what you want actually create a lot of emotions inside of you. One thing I really want was love, but actually love came to my life. Relationship was extremely hard. And I, do things running away or stay here. I have to make decision. But I'm so glad that I listened to that emotions, especially anger, resentment, all those emotions. There are reasons for us, right? And be curious instead of judging them based on what we learn about emotions. I think that was really important for me.
I just wanted to add, I'm not a therapist, but I want you guys to know that all these therapists up here are also authors, and their books are available in the gift shop right now. And so if you're looking for quick resources, go get one. My book's also in there, but it's not a therapy book. But I also just want to shout out all these amazing therapists that have become authors. I would say now, just in the past couple years, there's been at least 3, 4, 5 books specifically on Asian American therapy and mental health that have been published. These are resources that our community did not have even 5 years ago. So shout out to that. We are in a moment, right? We are talking about these things in our communities. We have people doing the work. We want people to have more resources to take home with you. Talk to your peers, talk to your families, get right with yourself. But this is a movement that we are all a part of.
Hi.
Oh, there you are.
Hi. Thank you. This is such a wonderful, beautiful panel. It was great to hear from all of you and a little bit of each of your histories. So one thing that was brought in to this discussion, just a little bit, was around religion and spirituality and mental health. And I'm aware that psychology and religion have a kind of real, a fraction, basically, in the history. And a lot of that goes back to Europe, even. And so my curious, I'd love almost to hear from at least, a couple, 2 or 3 of you. I'd love to hear at least one perspective, because, you each brought in your own family history and transgeneration and so forth. But I'm also interested in the historical or the kind of your own religious experience, one way or another. Maybe some people grew up in a religious community, maybe some people didn't at all. And I'm curious at least to have a few points in which you can speak a little bit how it was very nourishing and resourceful, and maybe the opposite, how it wasn't.
I consider myself a flaming atheist, but with a deep spiritual connection to living things, all living things. And that is the temple, ultimately dust to dust. And that there's a deep ethical obligation, I feel, to each of us to be here. And so that often finds me in alignment with spiritual communities, and that's great. I think the science, for those of you who may not know what you're kind of referring to, in surveys, psychologists are one of the least religious fields in the country. And yet we know spirituality is so important and can be life-saving and connecting for many people. So, just as with identity, with spirituality, I call people what they want to call themselves. Find your own place. If a spiritual organization becomes harmful and oppressive because of the humans who run it, you can find your own ways to worship and connect. But really finding what that is and going further back. I know there's many people in many of my communities who are struggling with the colonized nature of their religious education, that they love their God and their relationship to God and the strength, but they understand that a lot of how it was taught was very, very harmful. And that's a journey also about education and personal meaning making.
I think to add to that, my personal experience was just that actually. So I grew up in a conservative Christian church, and a lot of Korean immigrants did because it was also part of finding community. It wasn't exactly about finding religion or spirituality. A lot of these immigrants gathered at church places because it was only resource of food, of actual community gathering, or of being able to speak their language to their neighbors. And so that was the place that I grew up in. And in a lot of ways, I see that those resources and community care movements happen through the church community that I grew up in. And I love the strength of that I have taken away from the church. And yet there was so much of the harmful things that I have also been taught through the church too, because it was rigid. It was putting me in a box of a specific identity or behaviors that did not fit into my own identity and my own meaning making in life, or the way that something or specific things are greater than others or had to be worshipped in a certain way, right? And so it was discovery for me of taking what is important to me through this religious experience and spirituality, but also adding or eliminating things that do not work and are harmful in my life. And so I believe in nature and the way that we connect to nature. And I do believe that there is a greater being that is watching over us and protecting us, and I want to be connected to as well. That I know that I cannot do this work alone as well. My internal healing journey doesn't just become healed through myself alone. It's that I am supported by people, but the spirits of the people are also connecting with me to be able to find this community and healing journey as well.
Hi, my name is Jasmine. I'm also an occupational therapy doctorate student, and I really appreciate everyone's experience and for opening up on stage. And within that, you guys talked about how it's hard to bring up those conversations on mental health with like family. And I wanted to ask, what are some tools or tips that you would recommend for even opening up those conversations, even self-sabotaging behaviors, or even minimizing your experiences as an Asian American?
I'm going to talk about something I actually learned from Soojin and something I heard her talk about. And she actually already kind of talked about it a little bit, but this idea of gathering together with your family or community under like lower stakes circumstances that are cultural. So it's like whether it's doing Tai Chi together or cooking together or like playing a game. For me to hear from her, a therapist that wrote a book, that like those types of interactions are also dealing with our healing and our mental health. I was like, really? Like I don't have to have like a direct, we're looking at each other with eye contact and we're like, tell me your story. And it's like that very Western mode. I'm like, does that count as like healing and community healing? And so even in my own life, I've tried to apply that a little bit more to my family and my community around me. So I'm thinking, I love to have deep conversations about stuff, but you can only do that with certain people, right? There are certain people that are not open to that at all. So I'm thinking, well, what are some lower stakes activities that we can do? Whether it's just playing like a card game together, getting together, and then like even in that space, sometimes conversations go certain places, but even just having a positive experience of fun and joy together is already exceptionally healing. Or if like we're playing a game and like we were on the same team and we like won together. Like that's not the usual experience we usually have. Usually it's antagonistic, right? So even just having some of those lower stakes things that might just be categorized as fun, like when's the last time we had fun with our like some of these family members, right? So it's like even just bringing in some of that, I think, you never know what it can lead to, but even just building a place for that is extremely meaningful.
Hi, hello. Thank you all so much. So I have a question for you, using your expertise as mothers, as strong Asian women who work professionally in the field of intergenerational healing and all that you do. My central question is, how do we even approach this dialogue? There is so much stigma, across generations, even today in this younger generation, Generation Alpha, is that right? Just due to barriers of like acculturation, I'm hearing you talk a lot about how, as immigrants, as refugees, if you're a first generation American growing up here in the US, you are taught by your family, hey, nothing bad happens in America. We came from this faraway place that we want to get the hell away from, and you as an American need to, do this, do that, and nothing bad happens here. But we all know violence targets our community. It's a day-to-day reality in America. When things happen, how do you even approach it? Because I can think of a specific example for younger Asian women, younger AAPI women, girls and women. I don't know even how you deal with this as a teenager. We're in San Francisco. What's the hot topic? AI. There's like deep fake AIs of abuse, of girls, of women, specifically targeting Asian American Pacific Islander women. Like, how would you even approach your mother about something like this? This also crosses over into crime, into trauma, and then you're growing up as a first generation American. How do you even approach this dialogue, since we're here in a safe space? So thank you.
I think you just modeled it. You just share your stories, ask questions, and many of us, I heard this story, we weren't allowed to ask questions to our family or parents, and when I think I'm sharing my story here, and my mom wouldn't imagine that when she shared her story, maybe start with a little bit, she didn't think that it will be this moment, me telling my story to this audience. So I think start with you, wherever, whatever means you have as an artist, as an educator, as a students, researchers, we have a powerful tool to share our stories, and I think start from within us. And we are doing it.
Then I think I want to add both to this question and the same as well, that everyone's emotional capacities is different, and that's not stagnant. That different phases of life calls for different needs, emotional needs for different people, and that capacity changes. And so when we have conversations with who is also very important as well. And so is that individual right now very distressed and going through the trauma right now in this moment? And are they going to be able to accept this conversation right now in this moment? How are they going to receive that, right? So I think those are things to also kind of think about a little bit as well, because I know we could feel very helpless. We see it happening to them, or we see it happening to us, and I feel like I need to have this conversation now, but is that really for them or for me, right? And so if it's something within me that I want to resolve, then perhaps this conversation needs to happen with somebody else, not the person that I'm really trying to enforce this helplessness towards.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I have a question also regarding sharing family history. So I'm an international student here. So my mom and my grandparents all located in China. So it's hard to create some positive moments together at the present. So we can only have conversations. And I really want to learn how to initiate those conversation about like deep family history, but in a safe way. Because how can I talk about those but not trigger like more trauma, not only to myself but also to my grandparents and my mom.
It's a big ask. Thank you. You know, there is also a function to art, right? Sometimes we're talking about a story or a movie or piece of art. We're talking about our own trauma too, but we can talk about it here. You know, which character do you resonate with? What does this make you feel? It's a place. When you're having conversations, one is a culturally appropriate dialogue. So even in response to those other two questions, like I always say, I don't need anyone to say I have a mental health diagnosis or yes, this is trauma or no, it's not. All of our heritage cultures understood mind, body, spirit, this idea of balance. We all get out of balance. Too much chi, too little this, you know, like, so it's just about restoring balance. It's not you're sick or you're not. It's, you know, I feel like we're off and like, what can we do to restore that? What do we need, right? And then sometimes it's so overwhelming to have some kind of big talk. It's kind of like having a blank journal page. Sometimes it's just like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do with this. Are there small little pieces that you can think of? There is a card deck called Parents Are Human. So that's one example. It's just like one little question at a time, you know, and just getting to know each other. And that is kind of like the place to start. But yeah, otherwise sometimes it is. We're talking about the cat or this TV show, but we're also talking about how are you feeling, how are you doing, what's going on.
I think again, you are actually, you have started. I think start from you. My experience, if I was ready to receive those stories, maybe we didn't go that far or that deep. I think as an international student, I came here, I was ready for the moment actually doing myself in a personal journey, healing process first. And then when time came, actually my mom has to be ready to share her story. I cannot force her to share story. But when that moment came, actually, it just happened so beautifully, so quickly, so naturally. So part of that, trust that you are on your healing journey and work on your own emotions and also developing that inner strength so that you can hold other people, including your parents and family members.
And this is the last question.
First of all, thank you guys so much. It's wonderful to see women speaking on their experience, and I feel super seen hearing what you guys have gone through, so thank you. As you guys were talking about, what came up for me was I'm a first-generation Indian American, and I'm the only woman in my entire generation. And so sometimes I feel like I'm fighting oppressive systems within my culture, but also oppressive systems within the world that I live in here in the US. I'm curious to get some of your guys' thoughts on empowerment for Asian American women in specific, especially when you're feeling like you're kind of caught between two not so great options.
I can relate to your story. I think finding people that you can connect with that see you, I think that's the first thing I would recommend for you. And it may not be within your own community right now, but I hope you're kind of scoping who could I connect with in my community, outside my community, to empower me, to give me that perspective or the space that I don't have right now.
Great. Well, can we please get a round of applause for this amazing panel?